In the scorching desert of Afghanistan, where the line between life and death is drawn in sand and blood, one woman's split-second decision would redefine what it means to be a warrior. When bullets started flying and her commanding officer fell, combat medic Sergeant Maria Santos faced an impossible choice: follow protocol and call for backup, or risk everything to save the man who had saved her unit countless times before. What happened next would challenge every assumption about courage, duty, and the true meaning of never leaving a soldier behind. This is not just another war story. This is the story of a medic who became a warrior, a follower who became a leader, and a moment that proved heroes aren't born. They're forged in the fire of impossible decisions. Some say war brings out the worst in people. Maria Santos proved it can also reveal the extraordinary that lies hidden within ordinary souls. Maria Santos never imagined she would one day be crawling through enemy fire with an M4 rifle in her hands. Growing up in a small town in Texas, she was the daughter of a mechanic and a school teacher, raised with simple values and big dreams. Her childhood was filled with scraped knees that she bandaged herself, younger siblings she looked after when they fell sick, and a natural instinct to help others that seemed to flow through her veins like blood. When Maria was 16, her younger brother Carlos was diagnosed with leukemia. She spent countless hours in hospital waiting rooms, watching nurses and doctors work tirelessly to save lives. She observed how they moved with purpose, how they stayed calm under pressure, and how they brought comfort to families in their darkest moments. It was during those long nights in the pediatric ward that Maria discovered her calling. She wanted to be someone who could heal, someone who could make a difference when everything seemed hopeless. After graduating high school, Maria faced a difficult choice. Her family couldn't afford to send her to medical school, and student loans seemed overwhelming for a girl from their modest background. That's when Army recruiter Sergeant Thompson visited her high school during a career fair. He spoke about opportunities for young people to serve their country while gaining valuable medical training. The Army would pay for her education, provide hands-on experience, and give her the chance to help people who needed it most. Maria's parents were hesitant at first. The idea of their daughter in a combat zone terrified them, especially her mother, who had seen too many news reports about soldiers coming home in flag-draped coffins. But Maria had made up her mind. She enlisted with the goal of becoming a combat medic, someone who could save lives on the battlefield, and use that experience to become a doctor when she returned home. Basic training at Fort Benning was unlike anything Maria had ever experienced. The physical demands pushed her body to its limits, but it was the mental challenges that truly tested her resolve. She learned to think quickly under pressure, to make decisions when lives hung in the balance, and to never give up even when everything seemed impossible. Her drill sergeants noticed something special about Maria. She had a natural ability to stay calm during chaos, a quality that would prove invaluable in the medical field. After completing basic training, Maria advanced to advanced individual training at Fort Sam Houston, where she would learn the skills that would define her military career. The combat medic course was intense, combining advanced medical training with tactical skills. She learned how to treat gunshot wounds, perform emergency surgery in field conditions, and administer life-saving medications under pressure. But the training went beyond medical skills. Combat medics also needed to be soldiers, capable of defending themselves and their patients when necessary. Her instructors were veterans who had seen real combat, and they didn't sugarcoat the realities of war. They taught Maria that a combat medic's job was one of the most challenging in the military. Medics were often targeted by enemy forces because they represented hope to wounded soldiers. They had to be prepared to fight while simultaneously trying to save lives. The motto of the combat medic was clear: to preserve the fighting strength. This meant keeping soldiers alive and getting them back to the fight whenever possible. During her training, Maria met Staff Sergeant Michael Rodriguez, an experienced combat medic who had served 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan. Rodriguez became her mentor, teaching her not just the technical aspects of battlefield medicine, but the psychological preparation needed to function in a war zone. He explained that the hardest part of being a combat medic wasn't the blood or the pressure, but the emotional weight of knowing that sometimes, despite your best efforts, you couldn't save everyone. Rodriguez shared stories from his deployments, painting a realistic picture of what Maria could expect when she reached the battlefield. He told her about treating young soldiers who reminded him of his own little brother, about making impossible decisions with limited resources, and about the bonds that formed between medics and the soldiers they served. He emphasized that combat medics were often seen as guardian angels by their units, people who represented hope in the darkest moments. As Maria's training progressed, she excelled in every area. Her marksmanship scores were among the highest in her class, but it was her medical skills that truly set her apart. She had an intuitive understanding of trauma medicine, an ability to quickly assess injuries, and prioritize treatment that impressed even her most experienced instructors. She could start in 4-line in complete darkness, perform a thorough trauma assessment in under 2 minutes, and remain calm while others panicked. The final phase of her training involved realistic combat scenarios designed to prepare medics for the chaos of actual warfare. These exercises used live ammunition, pyrotechnics, and elaborate sets designed to simulate battlefield conditions. Maria found herself treating actors who had been made up to look like real casualties, complete with simulated wounds that looked disturbingly realistic. The goal was to create enough stress and chaos that medics would learn to function despite the confusion and fear that comes with real combat. During one particularly intense exercise, Maria was treating a simulated casualty when enemy forces began firing blank rounds in their direction. The noise was deafening, and smoke filled the air, making it difficult to see. While other trainees struggled to focus on their medical tasks, Maria continued working methodically, her hands steady as she applied pressure bandages and prepared medical supplies. Her instructors took note of her performance, marking her as someone with exceptional potential. When Maria finally graduated from combat medic school, she was ranked second in her class and received several awards for her performance. But more importantly, she had gained the confidence and skills she would need to save lives in one of the most dangerous places on Earth. She was assigned to the 82nd Airborne Division, one of the Army's elite units known for rapid deployment to combat zones around the world. Before deploying to Afghanistan, Maria had 2 weeks of leave to spend with her family. It was a bittersweet time, filled with pride in her accomplishments, but also anxiety about what lay ahead. Her brother Carlos, now in remission thanks to the treatments that had inspired Maria's career choice, told her how proud he was of her decision to serve. Her parents struggled with their emotions, torn between admiration for their daughter's courage and fear for her safety. During her leave, Maria visited her old high school and spoke to students. The transport plane descended through the thin mountain air, carrying Maria and her unit toward Bagram Airfield in Afghanistan. Through the small window, she could see an endless landscape of brown mountains and valleys that seemed to stretch forever under the harsh sun. This was her first glimpse of the country that would become her home for the next 12 months, a place where she would learn lessons that no training could have taught her. The heat hit Maria like a wall when she stepped off the plane. Even though it was early morning, the temperature was already climbing toward what would become a scorching day. The air was dry and filled with dust that seemed to coat everything within minutes. Around her, seasoned soldiers moved with the efficient motions of people who had done this many times before, while newer arrivals like Maria tried to take in their surroundings while managing their gear. Bagram Airfield was unlike anything Maria had ever seen. It was a massive military installation that operated 24 hours a day, with aircraft constantly taking off and landing, convoys moving supplies, and thousands of personnel going about their duties. The base had its own hospital, dining facilities, recreation centers, and even a small shopping area. It was like a small city dropped into the middle of a war zone, a piece of America transplanted to one of the most dangerous places on Earth. After processing through various administrative checkpoints, Maria was assigned to Forward Operating Base Chapman, a smaller outpost located in a more remote area where her unit would be conducting operations. FOB Chapman was a stark contrast to the relative comfort of Bagram. It was a collection of temporary buildings, guard towers, and defensive positions surrounded by concrete barriers and razor wire. Everything was covered in a fine layer of dust that never seemed to go away, no matter how often things were cleaned. Maria's new home was a small room she shared with another female soldier in a building made from shipping containers that had been converted into living quarters. The amenities were basic, with a small bed, a locker for personal belongings, and shared bathroom facilities. Air conditioning was sporadic at best, and the constant sound of generators provided the background noise that would become the soundtrack of her deployment. Her first week at FOB Chapman was spent getting oriented to the base layout, meeting her new unit members, and learning the specific procedures and protocols that would govern her daily life. The 82nd Airborne soldiers she was assigned to work with were a mix of experienced veterans and newer soldiers like herself. They had been deployed for several months already and had settled into the routines that help soldiers cope with the stress and uncertainty of combat operations. The unit's commanding officer was Captain James Mitchell, a West Point graduate who was serving his second tour in Afghanistan. Mitchell was known for his tactical expertise and his genuine care for the soldiers under his command. He took time to personally welcome Maria to the unit and explain the types of missions they would be conducting. The captain emphasized that as their medic, Maria would be one of the most important members of the team. Soldiers needed to know that if they were wounded, someone with the skills to save their lives would be there to help them. Maria's immediate supervisor was Sergeant First Class David Kim, the senior medic for the unit who had been in the Army for 8 years and had multiple combat deployments under his belt. Kim became Maria's guide to the realities of battlefield medicine in Afghanistan. He showed her the aid station where she would work, explained the medical evacuation procedures, and introduced her to the other medical personnel on the base. The aid station was a small building equipped with basic medical supplies and equipment needed to stabilize wounded soldiers before they could be transported to larger medical facilities. It had examination tables for fluids, medications, surgical supplies, and communication equipment to coordinate medical evacuations. Kim explained that most of their work would involve treating relatively minor injuries and illnesses, but they also had to be prepared for mass casualty events that could overwhelm their resources. During her first week, Maria also met the local Afghan interpreters who worked with the unit. These men risked their lives daily to help American forces communicate with local populations and navigate the complex cultural and political landscape of Afghanistan. Many of them had family members who had been threatened or killed because of their work with coalition forces, yet they continued to serve because they believed in the mission of bringing stability to their country. The interpreters taught Maria basic phrases in Dari and Pashto, the primary languages spoken in their area of operations. They also explained cultural customs and traditions that would be important for her to understand when interacting with Afghan civilians. Maria learned that as a female soldier, she would face unique challenges in a society where women traditionally had limited roles in public life. But she would also have opportunities to connect with Afghan women and children that male soldiers could not. Maria's first combat mission came during her second week at FOB Chapman. The unit was tasked with conducting a patrol through several villages to assess the security situation and meet with local leaders. As the unit medic, Maria carried additional medical supplies and was responsible for treating any casualties, both American and Afghan, that might occur during the mission. The patrol began before dawn, with the soldiers moving in vehicles through the narrow roads that connected the villages. The landscape was austere but beautiful, with terraced fields where local farmers grew crops using irrigation methods that had been used for centuries. Children would run alongside the vehicles, waving and shouting greetings, while adults watched from doorways with expressions that ranged from friendly to suspicious to fearful. During the patrol, Maria experienced her first real taste of the complexity of the situation in Afghanistan. In one village, they were warmly welcomed by elders who appreciated the security provided by coalition forces and wanted to discuss development projects that could benefit their community. In the next village, the reception was much cooler, with residents who seemed nervous and unwilling to engage in conversation. The interpreters explained that this village had recently been visited by Taliban fighters who had warned residents against cooperating with coalition forces. The patrol concluded without any major incidents, but Maria learned valuable lessons about the environment she would be operating in for the next year. Afghanistan was not simply a battlefield where enemy forces could be easily identified and engaged. It was a complex society where politics, culture, religion, and economics all played roles in determining who was friendly, who was hostile, and who was simply trying to survive in an impossible situation. As the weeks passed, Maria settled into the rhythm of life at FOB Chapman. She spent her days treating soldiers for everything from minor cuts and illnesses to more serious injuries sustained during missions. She learned to work with limited resources and to improvise solutions when standard medical supplies were not available. She also began to understand the psychological challenges that soldiers faced during extended deployments, as homesickness, stress, and the constant threat of violence took their toll on even the strongest individuals. One of Maria's most challenging cases during her early weeks involved treating an Afghan civilian who had been injured when his vehicle struck an improvised explosive device. The man had severe injuries to his legs and was in critical condition when he was brought to the aid station. Working with Sergeant Kim, Maria helped stabilize the patient and coordinate his evacuation to a larger medical facility where he could receive advanced surgical care. The mission briefing took place in the Operations Center at FOB Chapman on a sweltering afternoon in July. Intelligence reports indicated that a high-value target, a Taliban commander responsible for coordinating attacks against coalition forces, was hiding in a compound located in the mountains about 15 kilometers from the base. Captain Mitchell stood before a map, pointing out the route they would take and the tactical approach they would use to capture or eliminate the target. The mission, designated Operation Red Eagle, would involve a small team of 12 soldiers from Maria's unit. They would travel in 3 armored vehicles to the target location, establish a perimeter around the compound, and then conduct a thorough search for the Taliban commander and any intelligence materials that might be present. The operation was scheduled to begin before dawn the following day, taking advantage of darkness to approach the target without being detected. Maria listened carefully as Captain Mitchell explained her role in the mission. As the team medic, she would travel in the middle vehicle with the captain and be prepared to treat any casualties that might occur during the operation. She would carry her standard medical equipment along with additional supplies for potential mass casualty situations. The intelligence reports suggested that the compound might be defended by armed fighters, so the possibility of combat was significant. After the briefing, Maria spent the evening preparing her medical kit and reviewing trauma treatment procedures. She organized her supplies methodically, ensuring that everything she might need was easily accessible even in darkness or under stress. Her kit included 4 fluids, pain medications, antibiotics, pressure bandages, chest seals for treating gunshot wounds to the torso, and emergency surgical supplies for the most serious injuries. The team gathered in the vehicle staging area at 3 a.m, with each soldier performing final equipment checks by the light of red-filtered flashlights. The 3 mine-resistant ambush-protected vehicles, or MRAPs, were heavily armored trucks designed to withstand improvised explosive devices and small arms fire. Each vehicle was equipped with advanced communication equipment, night vision capabilities, and mounted machine guns for defensive purposes. Captain Mitchell conducted a final briefing, reminding everyone of their individual responsibilities and the communications procedures they would use during the operation. He emphasized the importance of maintaining noise discipline during their approach to the target and the need for everyone to be ready to adapt if the situation changed unexpectedly. The captain had led dozens of similar missions during his deployment and was known for his careful planning and concern for his soldiers' safety. The convoy departed FOB Chapman in complete darkness, using night vision equipment to navigate the rough mountain roads without using headlights. Maria sat in the middle seat of the command vehicle, surrounded by communication equipment and additional ammunition for the crew-served weapons. The ride was bumpy and uncomfortable, with the heavily armored vehicle bouncing over rocks and potholes as it climbed into the mountains. As they traveled, Maria reflected on how much her life had changed since arriving in Afghanistan. 6 months earlier, she had been a student learning about trauma medicine in controlled classroom environments. Now she was heading toward a potential combat situation, carrying equipment that could mean the difference between life and death for her fellow soldiers. The transformation from student to combat medic had happened gradually, but moments like this made her realize how much responsibility now rested on her shoulders. The convoy reached its destination as the first hints of dawn began to appear on the eastern horizon. The target compound was located on a hillside overlooking a valley, with several buildings surrounded by stone walls that provided both concealment and defensive positions for anyone inside. Captain Mitchell used his binoculars to study the compound while the other soldiers established security positions around the convoy. Through her own binoculars, Maria could see that the compound appeared to be occupied. Smoke was rising from one of the buildings, suggesting that someone was cooking breakfast, and there were signs of recent activity around the main gate. The intelligence reports had been accurate, and it appeared likely that the Taliban commander was indeed present in the compound. The assault team moved forward on foot, using the natural terrain features to conceal their approach. Maria followed Captain Mitchell as they worked their way up the hillside, staying low and moving carefully to avoid making noise on the rocky ground. The weight of her medical equipment and personal weapons made the climb more difficult, but her physical training had prepared her for exactly this type of situation. As they reached their assault positions, the team could hear voices coming from inside the compound. The interpreters confirmed that the conversations were in Pashto and included references to American forces and recent attacks. This confirmed that armed fighters were present in the compound and that they were likely involved in planning operations against coalition forces. Captain Mitchell gave the signal to begin the assault, and the team moved through a breach in the compound wall that had been created by an explosive charge. The soldiers moved with practiced efficiency, clearing each building systematically while searching for the target and any other enemy fighters who might be present. Maria followed the assault team into the compound, staying close enough to provide immediate medical support if needed, but far enough back to avoid interfering with the tactical operation. Her heart was pounding with adrenaline, but her mind remained focused on her medical responsibilities. She mentally reviewed the locations of all team members so that she could reach anyone who might be wounded as quickly as possible. The first 3 buildings were cleared without encountering any resistance. The team found evidence that the compound had recently been used by Taliban fighters, including weapons caches and communication equipment, but no people were discovered in the initial search. Captain Mitchell directed the team to search the largest building in the compound, which appeared to be the main residence. As the assault team approached the main building, the situation changed dramatically. Gunfire erupted from multiple positions around the compound, indicating that enemy fighters had been lying in wait for the American soldiers to expose themselves. Muzzle flashes came from windows, rooftops, and concealed positions that had not been visible during the initial reconnaissance. The sudden intensity of the firefight caught the team in a dangerous position, with limited cover and enemy fighters firing from elevated positions. Captain Mitchell immediately began directing his soldiers to defensive positions while calling for support from the vehicles that had remained at the base of the hill. The communication radio crackled with reports of enemy positions and requests for covering fire. Maria found herself pressed against a stone wall with bullets striking the ground around her. The sound of gunfire was deafening, and the air filled with dust kicked up by the impacts. She could hear Captain Mitchell shouting orders to his soldiers, trying to coordinate their response to the ambush while keeping track of everyone's location and condition. Private Johnson, one of the newer soldiers in the unit, was positioned about 20 meters away from Maria when she heard him cry out in pain. Through the chaos of the firefight, she could see that he had been hit by enemy fire and was lying motionless behind a low stone wall. His fellow soldiers were pinned down by heavy gunfire and unable to reach him to provide assistance. Maria's hands moved with practiced efficiency as she stabilized Captain Mitchell's chest wound, but her mind was racing through the tactical situation unfolding around her. The enemy gunfire had not diminished, and she could hear the distinct sounds of multiple weapons firing from elevated positions around the compound. Her fellow soldiers were pinned down, unable to maneuver effectively without coordinating leadership. Through the din of battle, she heard Sergeant Kim's voice on the radio, trying to establish communication with higher command to request immediate reinforcements. But help was at least 30 minutes away, and Maria could see that they didn't have 30 minutes. The enemy fighters had them surrounded and were systematically targeting anyone who tried to move from cover. Captain Mitchell grabbed Maria's arm with surprising strength for someone who had been shot in the chest. His voice was strained but clear as he spoke through gritted teeth. "Santos, you need to get these men organized. Without coordination, we're going to lose people." He paused to catch his breath before continuing. "Take my rifle. Take my radio. Get them out of here." Maria looked into her captain's eyes and saw something she had never seen before. It wasn't just trust in her medical abilities, but confidence in her capacity to lead soldiers in combat. Captain Mitchell had observed her during their months together and had seen qualities that Maria herself didn't know she possessed. He was asking her to step beyond her role as a medic and take command of soldiers whose lives depended on tactical decisions she had never been trained to make. For a moment, Maria hesitated. She was a medic, not an infantry soldier. Her job was to save lives, not to engage in combat operations. But, as she looked around the compound at her fellow soldiers, she realized that saving lives sometimes required taking actions that went far beyond traditional medical treatment. If she didn't act, more soldiers would be wounded or killed. She picked up Captain Mitchell's M4 rifle and slung it across her shoulder, the weight feeling strange after months of carrying only medical equipment. The weapon was familiar from her training, but she had never imagined she would need to use it in combat while simultaneously serving as the unit's medic. She took the captain's radio and headset, knowing that communication would be crucial for coordinating the team's response. Maria's first priority was completing the medical treatment of her 2 wounded soldiers. She quickly applied a pressure bandage to Private Johnson's leg wound and administered pain medication to keep him conscious and functional. For Captain Mitchell, she inserted a small chest tube to ensure his lung wouldn't collapse, then secured him in a position where he could breathe more easily while remaining protected from enemy fire. With both casualties stabilized, Maria turned her attention to the tactical situation. Using Captain Mitchell's radio, she contacted each soldier position to get a detailed picture of the enemy's locations and the condition of her team. What she learned was not encouraging. The enemy had at least 8 fighters positioned in 3 different buildings, with overlapping fields of fire that made movement extremely dangerous. Sergeant Kim's voice came over the radio with an urgent update. "Santos, we've got movement on the east side. Looks like they're trying to flank us. If they get to that position, they'll have a clear shot at Johnson and the captain." Maria realized that the enemy was not content to simply pin down the American soldiers. They were maneuvering to eliminate the wounded and cut off the team's escape route. This was no longer a defensive situation. It was rapidly becoming a fight for survival that would require aggressive action to prevent a disaster. Drawing on everything she had learned during her combat training, Maria began formulating a plan. The enemy fighters were concentrated in fixed positions, which gave them advantages in terms of cover and elevation, but also made them predictable. If she could coordinate a simultaneous assault from multiple directions, the team might be able to overwhelm their positions before they could effectively respond. Using the radio, Maria began issuing orders to her fellow soldiers, coordinating their movements with a clarity and confidence that surprised even herself. She directed Sergeant Kim to position his team for an assault on the main building where the heaviest enemy fire was coming from. She ordered Specialist Rodriguez to provide covering fire, while she led a flanking maneuver to eliminate the enemy fighters who were threatening to overrun their position. The plan required Maria to leave her wounded soldiers temporarily and lead an assault team across open ground under enemy fire. Every instinct as a medic told her to stay with her patients and continue providing medical care. But every instinct as a soldier told her that the best way to save her patients was to eliminate the threat that could kill them all. Maria gathered 3 soldiers and explained her plan for the flanking maneuver. They would move along the eastern wall of the compound, using the terrain features to mask their approach, then assault the enemy positions from an unexpected direction. The success of the plan depended on timing, surprise, and the ability of each soldier to perform under intense pressure. As they prepared to move, Maria felt a strange transformation taking place within herself. The nervous energy she had felt at the beginning of the firefight had been replaced by a focused calm that allowed her to think clearly despite the chaos around her. Her medical training had taught her to function under pressure, and those skills translated surprisingly well to combat leadership. The flanking team began their movement, staying low and using available cover to avoid detection by the enemy fighters. Maria led the way, her M4 rifle ready as she constantly scanned for threats. Behind her, the three soldiers moved with the confidence that comes from following someone who knows what they're doing. Even though Maria herself was making decisions based on instinct and training rather than experience. As they reached their assault position, Maria could see three enemy fighters positioned in a small building about 50 meters away. They were focused on firing at the main group of American soldiers and had not yet detected the flanking team's approach. This was the moment that would determine the success or failure of her plan. Maria signaled for her team to prepare for the assault, then spoke into her radio to coordinate the simultaneous attack. All teams, this is Santos. Execute on my mark. She took a deep breath, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether her soldiers lived or died. 3, 2, 1 mark. The compound erupted with gunfire as both assault teams opened fire simultaneously. Maria led her team in a swift assault on the enemy position, her rifle firing controlled bursts as she moved from cover to cover. The training that had seemed so abstract during her preparation for deployment suddenly became real and immediate as she engaged enemy fighters in close combat. The surprise of the coordinated assault had the desired effect. The enemy fighters, caught between two attacking forces, were unable to maintain their defensive positions. Maria watched as one fighter fell under fire from her team, while the others attempted to retreat to more defensible positions deeper in the compound. But the battle was far from over. Even as some enemy positions were overrun, new threats emerged. Maria heard the distinctive sound of an RPG being fired and instinctively threw herself behind a stone wall as the rocket-propelled grenade exploded nearby. The blast showered her with debris and left her ears ringing, but she was uninjured and able to continue fighting. Through the chaos, Maria heard Specialist Rodriguez's voice on the radio reporting that he had been hit by shrapnel from the RPG blast. Even as she continued to engage enemy targets, her mind automatically shifted back to her medical responsibilities. She had wounded soldiers who needed treatment, but the tactical situation still required her immediate attention. Maria found herself moving between two worlds, the world of the combat medic and the world of the infantry soldier. One moment, she was firing her rifle at enemy positions. The next, she was coordinating medical treatment over the radio while continuing to direct the tactical response. It was a balancing act that required her to constantly shift mental gears while maintaining awareness of both the medical and tactical situations. The firefight continued for what felt like hours, but was actually less than 20 minutes. Gradually, the enemy fire began to diminish as the coordinated assaults took their toll. Maria's radio crackled with reports of enemy fighters killed or wounded, and the sound of incoming fire became less frequent and less accurate. As the immediate threat began to subside, Maria was able to return to her wounded soldiers and assess their conditions. Captain Mitchell was conscious and stable. His breathing improved since she had inserted the chest tube. Private Johnson's leg wound had stopped bleeding, and he was alert despite his injuries. Specialist Rodriguez had suffered shrapnel wounds to his arm, but was still capable of fighting. But Maria knew that their situation was still precarious. The debriefing took place 3 days after Operation Red Eagle in a small conference room at FOB Chapman. Colonel Sarah Williams, the brigade commander, had flown in specifically to interview the soldiers involved in the mission and understand exactly what had happened during the firefight at the compound. Word had already reached higher command levels about the extraordinary actions of combat medic Sergeant Maria Santos, and the Army wanted a complete record of the events. Maria sat at a metal table facing Colonel Williams, still trying to process everything that had happened. The transformation from medic to combat leader had occurred so quickly during the firefight that she was only now beginning to understand the full implications of her actions. Around the table sat the other soldiers from her unit, including Captain Mitchell, who had been released from the hospital with his arm in a sling but otherwise recovered from his chest wound. Colonel Williams reviewed the after-action reports and radio transcripts from the mission, her expression growing more serious as she absorbed the details. "Sergeant Santos," she began, "according to these reports, you took command of a 12-man unit during active combat, coordinated a successful counter-assault against superior enemy forces, and simultaneously provided life-saving medical treatment to multiple casualties. Is this accurate?" Maria nodded, still somewhat amazed that she had actually done these things. "Yes, ma'am. Captain Mitchell was wounded and unable to continue commanding the unit. Someone needed to coordinate our response, and I was in a position to take action." The colonel leaned forward, studying Maria intently. "Sergeant, you're a combat medic, not an infantry officer. You had no formal training in small unit tactics or combat leadership. Where did you learn to coordinate the type of assault you led against those enemy positions?" Maria thought carefully before responding. "Ma'am, I think my medical training actually prepared me for combat leadership in ways I didn't expect. As a medic, you learn to stay calm under pressure, to make quick decisions with limited information, and to prioritize actions based on what will save the most lives. Those skills translated to the tactical situation we faced." Captain Mitchell spoke up from across the table. "Colonel, with respect, Sergeant Santos did more than just apply medical skills to a tactical problem. She demonstrated natural leadership abilities and tactical instincts that you can't teach in a classroom. Her actions saved my life and the lives of every soldier in that compound." Colonel Williams made notes in her file before continuing her questions. "Sergeant Santos, when you picked up Captain Mitchell's rifle and took command of the unit, did you consider the possibility that you might be exceeding your authority as a medic?" Maria had thought about this question during the past 3 days. "Ma'am, I considered my primary responsibility, which is to preserve the fighting strength of the unit. In that situation, preserving fighting strength meant taking whatever actions were necessary to prevent additional casualties. I believe that coordinating a tactical response was the best way to fulfill my medical responsibilities." The debriefing continued for 2 hours as Colonel Williams gathered detailed information about every aspect of the mission. She interviewed each soldier separately, building a complete picture of the firefight and Maria's role in turning a potential disaster into a successful operation. The colonel was particularly interested in the leadership dynamics and how the other soldiers had responded to taking orders from their unit medic. Sergeant Kim provided crucial testimony about Maria's performance. "Colonel, I've served with a lot of medics over the years, and I've never seen anyone transition from medical care to combat leadership the way Sergeant Santos did. She never lost focus on her wounded soldiers, but she also recognized that the best way to protect them was to eliminate the threat. Her tactical decisions were sound, and her execution was flawless." After the formal debriefing, Colonel Williams asked to speak with Maria privately. They walked to the small chapel on the base, where they could talk without interruption. The colonel's demeanor softened as she sat across from Maria in the quiet space. "Sergeant Santos, what you did during that firefight was extraordinary, but I want you to understand the larger implications of your actions. You've demonstrated that the traditional boundaries between medical and combat roles may not be as rigid as we've always assumed. Your performance is going to influence how the Army thinks about training and employing combat medics." Maria listened carefully as the colonel continued. "I'm recommending you for the Silver Star, which is the 3rd highest decoration for valor in the Army. Your actions clearly meet the criteria for exceptional gallantry in action against an enemy force. But, more than that, I'm also recommending you for immediate promotion to Staff Sergeant and assignment to a leadership position where you can share what you've learned with other medics." The recognition was overwhelming for Maria, who had simply done what she thought was necessary to save her fellow soldiers. "Colonel, I appreciate the recognition, but I just did my job. Any medic in the unit would have done the same thing." Colonel Williams smiled and shook her head. "Sergeant, I've been in the Army for 22 years, and I can tell you with certainty that not every medic would have done what you did. You showed exceptional courage, leadership, and tactical judgment under the most difficult circumstances imaginable. Those qualities deserve recognition and should be used to benefit the entire Army." News of Maria's actions spread quickly throughout the base and eventually reached her family back home in Texas. Her parents received a call from their congressman's office informing them that their daughter was being recommended for a major military decoration. The quiet girl who had left home to become a medic had become a combat hero whose story would inspire other young people to consider military service. Media attention followed the official recognition. Military journalists interviewed Maria about her experiences and the lessons she had learned about combat medicine and leadership. She was featured in Army publications and invited to speak at medical conferences about the integration of medical and tactical training for combat medics. But, for Maria, the most meaningful recognition came from her fellow soldiers. Captain Mitchell, fully recovered from his wounds, made a point of thanking her publicly during the unit's next formation. Sergeant Santos proved that heroism isn't about your military occupational specialty or your rank. It's about character, courage, and the willingness to put others before yourself. She exemplifies everything we value as soldiers. The remaining months of Maria's deployment passed quickly as she took on expanded responsibilities within the unit. She began training newly arrived medics, sharing the lessons she had learned about functioning in combat environments and the importance of being prepared to step outside traditional role boundaries when necessary. Her experiences became part of the informal curriculum that prepared medics for the realities of modern warfare. Maria also worked with Army medical researchers who were studying the integration of medical and tactical training. Her insights contributed to new training programs that taught combat medics basic leadership skills and tactical awareness that could prove crucial in situations where medical and combat responsibilities overlapped. As her deployment neared its end, Maria reflected on how much she had changed since arriving in Afghanistan. The nervous young woman who had stepped off the transport plane at Bagram Airfield had been replaced by a confident leader who had proven herself under the most demanding circumstances imaginable. She had discovered capabilities within herself that she never knew existed and had learned that serving others sometimes required courage that went far beyond medical training. The award ceremony took place on a sunny afternoon at FOB Chapman, with soldiers from across the base gathered to witness the presentation. Colonel Williams read the citation for Maria's Silver Star, describing her actions during Operation Red Eagle and the impact her leadership had on the mission's success. As the medal was pinned to her uniform, Maria thought about all the people who had helped shape her journey, from her parents and brother to her drill sergeants and fellow soldiers. When Maria returned to the United States, she was assigned to Fort Sam Houston, where she helped develop new training programs for combat medics. Her experiences in Afghanistan became the foundation for curriculum changes that taught medics to think beyond traditional medical roles and to be prepared for leadership responsibilities in combat situations. Maria also resumed her education, using her GI Bill benefits to complete her bachelor's degree in preparation for medical school. But her plans had evolved beyond her original goal of becoming a doctor. She wanted to become a military physician who could contribute to the development of combat medicine and the training of future medical soldiers. During a visit home to Texas, Maria spoke at her old high school about military service and the opportunities available for young people interested in medical careers. She emphasized that military service had taught her more about medicine, leadership, and herself than she ever could have learned in a traditional academic setting. She encouraged students to consider how military service could help them achieve their goals while serving something greater than themselves. One student asked Maria whether she ever regretted her decision to enlist instead of going directly to college. Maria thought for a moment before responding. Military service taught me that healing sometimes requires fighting, that leadership can come from unexpected places, and that ordinary people are capable of extraordinary actions when others depend on them. Those are lessons I never could have learned in a classroom, and they've made me a better person and will make me a better doctor. After her presentation, Maria was approached by a young woman who reminded her of herself at that age. The student was interested in becoming a doctor but worried about the cost of medical school and whether she was tough enough to handle military service. Maria shared her story and encouraged the young woman to consider all her options, including military service as a path to achieving her medical career goals. Years later, as Dr. Maria Santos completed her residency in emergency medicine, she often reflected on the lessons she had learned during those crucial months in Afghanistan. The combat experience had taught her that medicine was about more than treating symptoms or following protocols. It was about making difficult decisions under pressure, leading others when leadership was needed, and never giving up when lives hung in the balance. The young woman from Texas who had enlisted to help others had discovered that sometimes helping others means being willing to fight for them. She had learned that heroism isn't defined by your job description or your rank, but by your willingness to step forward when others need you most. And she had proven that the greatest acts of healing sometimes require the courage to pick up a weapon and complete the mission, no matter what the cost. Maria's story became part of Army folklore, told to new generations of soldiers and medics as an example of the extraordinary potential that exists within ordinary people. But for Maria herself, the greatest reward was knowing that her actions had brought her fellow soldiers home safely, and that the lessons she had learned would help future medics save even more lives in the challenging years ahead. In an exposed position with wounded soldiers who needed medical evacuation, and there might be additional enemy forces in the area, the success of her tactical decisions had prevented a potential disaster, but they still needed to extract safely from the compound and return to base. Using Captain Mitchell's radio, Maria coordinated with the support vehicles at the base of the hill and arranged for medical evacuation helicopters to meet them at a secure landing zone. She organized the movement of the wounded soldiers and ensured that the tactical situation was secure before beginning their withdrawal from the compound. As they prepared to leave, Captain Mitchell looked at Maria with an expression of pride and amazement. "Santos," he said, his voice still weak from his injuries, "that was some of the finest soldiering I've ever seen. You saved lives today, and not just with your medical skills." Maria felt a mixture of pride and exhaustion as she helped carry the wounded to the evacuation point. She had discovered capabilities within herself that she never knew existed, abilities that went far beyond anything she had learned in medical training. The quiet girl from Texas who had enlisted to help others had learned that sometimes helping others means being willing to fight for them, even when it meant stepping far outside the traditional boundaries of medical care. The medical evacuation helicopters arrived 30 minutes later, and Maria supervised the loading of the wounded soldiers while providing medical updates to the flight medics. As the helicopters lifted off toward the base hospital, Maria realized that her deployment had fundamentally changed. She was no longer just a combat medic serving with an infantry unit. She had become something new, a hybrid warrior healer whose actions had redefined what it meant to serve as a medical soldier in combat. Maria knew that Johnson was critically wounded and would die if he didn't receive immediate medical treatment. But reaching his position would mean crossing an open area that was being swept by enemy fire from multiple directions. Every instinct told her to stay in her covered position and wait for the firefight to end, but her training as a medic and her commitment to her fellow soldiers demanded a different response. Without hesitation, Maria gathered her medical kit and began moving toward Johnson's position, staying as low as possible and using every available piece of cover. Bullets struck the ground around her as she ran, and she could hear the sharp crack of rounds passing close to her head. The distance seemed much greater than 20 meters as she sprinted across the compound under fire. She reached Johnson just as Captain Mitchell was hit by sniper fire from one of the buildings. Maria watched in horror as her commanding officer fell backward, blood spreading across his uniform from a wound to his upper chest. The soldier who had led them on dozens of missions, who had always seemed invincible under pressure, was now lying motionless and critically wounded. Maria found herself facing an impossible decision. Private Johnson was bleeding heavily from a gunshot wound to his leg and needed immediate treatment to prevent him from going into shock. But Captain Mitchell appeared to have been shot in the chest or shoulder, and his condition might be even more critical. With enemy fighters continuing to fire from multiple positions, she had to choose which casualty to treat first, knowing that delay could mean death for either soldier. The training that had been drilled into Maria during her medical education took over. She quickly assessed both casualties and determined that Captain Mitchell's wound was potentially life-threatening and required immediate attention. Johnson's leg wound was serious, but not immediately fatal if pressure was applied to control the bleeding. Maria crawled to Captain Mitchell's position, where she found him conscious but struggling to breathe. Her examination revealed that the bullet had struck him in the upper chest, potentially damaging his lung. She immediately began treating his wound, applying pressure bandages, and preparing to insert a chest tube if his breathing became more compromised. As she worked on Captain Mitchell, Maria realized that the tactical situation was deteriorating. The enemy fighters had superior positions and were maintaining heavy fire on the American soldiers. Without their commanding officer to coordinate the response, the soldiers were struggling to organize an effective defense. She could hear confusion in the radio communications as different soldiers tried to take charge of the situation. It was at this moment that Maria Santos, the quiet girl from Texas who had enlisted to save lives, made a decision that would define her military career and change her understanding of what it means to be a soldier. She realized that treating the wounded was not enough. If the tactical situation continued to deteriorate, all of the soldiers in the compound could be killed or wounded. Someone needed to take action to change the momentum of the battle. Looking at Captain Mitchell's M4 rifle lying next to his wounded body, Maria knew what she had to do. The incident reminded Maria why she had become a medic in the first place. Despite the political complexities and cultural differences that divided American soldiers and Afghan civilians, when someone was injured and in pain, those differences became irrelevant. Her job was to save lives, regardless of nationality, religion, or politics. It was a principle that would guide her actions throughout her deployment and ultimately define the moment that would make her a hero. As Maria gained experience and confidence, she began to take on additional responsibilities within the unit. Captain Mitchell noticed her leadership potential and started including her in planning sessions for upcoming missions. He valued her medical expertise and her ability to think clearly under pressure. Maria also began mentoring newer soldiers who arrived at FOB Chapman, sharing the lessons she had learned and helping them adjust to life in a combat zone. The bond between Maria and her fellow soldiers grew stronger with each shared experience. She learned their personal stories, their fears, and their hopes for the future. They, in turn, came to trust her completely, knowing that if they were wounded, Maria would risk her own safety to save them. This trust was the foundation of the special relationship between combat medics and the soldiers they serve, a bond that goes beyond friendship to become something approaching family. One evening, while sitting in the small recreation area where soldiers could relax and call home, Maria received news that her brother Carlos had been accepted to medical school. The irony was not lost on her that while she was treating combat injuries in Afghanistan, her brother was beginning the journey that she had originally planned for herself. But Maria realized that her path had been different for a reason. The skills and experiences she was gaining in Afghanistan would make her a better doctor someday, just as her medical training was making her a better soldier. As her third month in Afghanistan began, Maria felt confident in her abilities and settled in her role. She had treated dozens of patients, participated in numerous missions, and proven herself to be a valuable member of the unit. But she had not yet faced the ultimate test that awaits every combat medic, the moment when everything she had learned would be put to the test in a life-or-death situation where failure was not an option. That test was coming sooner than Maria could have imagined, in the form of a mission that would challenge every assumption she had about her own capabilities and force her to make decisions that would define not only her military career, but her understanding of courage, duty, and what it truly means to be a warrior. The quiet girl from Texas who had enlisted to help others was about to discover that sometimes the greatest act of healing requires the willingness to fight. About military service and the opportunities available for those interested in medical careers. She emphasized that serving as a combat medic had taught her more about medicine, leadership, and herself than she ever could have learned in a traditional classroom setting. She encouraged young people to consider how military service could help them achieve their goals while serving something greater than themselves. As her deployment date approached, Maria felt a mixture of excitement and nervousness. She had trained for this moment for over a year, and she was confident in her abilities. But she also understood that no amount of training could fully prepare someone for the realities of combat. She would soon be tested in ways that would challenge everything she thought she knew about herself, her limits, and her capacity for courage under fire. The night before leaving for Afghanistan, Maria sat with her family for dinner, knowing it might be months before she would see them again. Her mother had prepared all of her favorite foods, and they spent the evening sharing stories and memories. As she hugged her parents goodbye the next morning, Maria promised them that she would be careful and that she would use her training to help bring everyone home safely. Little did Maria know that within months of arriving in Afghanistan, she would face a situation that would test every skill she had learned and force her to make decisions that would define not only her military career, but her understanding of what it truly means to be a soldier. The quiet girl from Texas who had enlisted to help others was about to discover that sometimes helping others means being willing to fight for them, even when it means putting yourself in mortal danger.